When a wealthy grandmother decided to attend her family reunion, disguised as someone who had lost everything, she discovered shocking truths about the people she had been financially supporting for years. What happened next changed her family forever and taught everyone a lesson they would never forget. Before we start this incredible story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and at the end, don't forget to rate our story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. 70-year-old Eleanor Washington sat in her private study, staring at a stack of bank statements and family photos scattered across her mahogany desk. The contrast was stark. Millions of dollars in various accounts on one side, smiling family faces on the other. But tonight those smiles felt hollow to her. Her 14-year-old granddaughter Zoe knocked gently on the door. "Grandma Ellie?" Mom said, "Dinner's ready." Eleanor looked up at Zoe, the only family member who still called her by her childhood nickname, the only one who visited without asking for money. "Come in, sweetheart. I need to ask you something." Zoe settled into the leather chair across from her grandmother's desk, immediately noticing the troubled expression on Eleanor's face. "What's wrong, Grandma? You look sad." Eleanor had been wrestling with a decision for weeks, but seeing Zoe's genuine concern reminded her why this choice was so important. "Zoe, what do you think about our family?" "What do you mean? Do you think they love me? Or do they love what I can provide for them?" Zoe was mature for her age, having grown up watching her extended family's interactions with her wealthy grandmother. "Grandma, that's a heavy question. Why are you asking?" Eleanor picked up an invitation from her desk, elegant cardstock with gold lettering. "The annual Washington family reunion is next month. 53 family members will be there. And I've been thinking, what if they didn't know I was wealthy? What if they thought I had lost everything?" Zoe's eyes widened with understanding. "You want to test them? Is that wrong of me?" Eleanor asked, vulnerability creeping into her voice. For all her wealth and business acumen, she was still a grandmother who wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she had. Zoe considered this carefully. "Grandma, I think you have the right to know if people love you for real. But are you prepared for what you might find out?" The question hung in the air. Eleanor had built her fortune over 40 years, starting as a single mother with a small catering business and growing it into a food service empire worth over $80 million. She had been generous with her family, paying for college educations, down payments on houses, medical bills, business ventures. But lately she noticed that family calls only came when someone needed money. "Zoe," Eleanor said slowly, "I think I need to know the truth even if it hurts." "Then I'll help you," Zoe said without hesitation. "But we need to be smart about it." Over the next hour, grandmother and granddaughter developed a plan that was both brilliant and heartbreaking. Eleanor would attend the reunion dressed modestly, driving an old car, and claiming that a series of bad investments had left her nearly broke. They would see how the family treated her when they thought she couldn't help them anymore. "But Grandma," Zoe said as they finalized their plan, "what if some of them really do love you? What if this hurts the good people in our family?" Eleanor paused, considering her granddaughter's wisdom. "Then we'll make sure those people know the truth eventually. But Zoe, I need to see who stands by me when they think I have nothing to offer." What Eleanor didn't anticipate was how much this decision would change not just her perspective on her family, but her understanding of herself. 2 weeks before the reunion, Eleanor began her transformation. She had Zoe help her shop at thrift stores, an experience that was both humbling and eye-opening for a woman who hadn't worried about prices in decades. "Grandma," Zoe said as they browsed through racks of used clothes at a Goodwill store, "have you ever shopped here before?" "Not since I was your age," Eleanor admitted, holding up a simple blue dress that cost $8. "Your grandfather and I used to shop at places like this when we were starting out." As they shopped, Eleanor found herself remembering her early struggles. She had been so focused on building wealth and providing for her family that she had forgotten what it felt like to count every dollar, to make difficult choices between wants and needs. "This dress is perfect," Zoe said, holding up a conservative grey outfit. "It's nice but not expensive looking, and we should get you some different shoes." Eleanor tried on a pair of worn but comfortable flats that cost $5. Looking at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the polished, confident businesswoman. In her place stood someone who looked ordinary. "How do I look?" she asked Zoe. "Like someone who's been through hard times but is still trying to maintain her dignity," Zoe replied thoughtfully. "It's perfect for what we're trying to do." Their next stop was to find an appropriate car. Eleanor owned 3 vehicles, a Mercedes, a BMW, and a vintage Jaguar. None of these would work for her performance. Instead, she arranged to borrow a 2005 Honda Civic from Maria, her longtime housekeeper. "Mrs. Washington," Maria said as she handed over the keys, "are you sure about this plan? Your family loves you." Eleanor had confided in Maria, who had worked for the family for 15 years and had witnessed countless family interactions. "Maria, I hope you're right, but I need to know for sure. What if you don't like what you discover?" It was a question Eleanor had been avoiding, but she forced herself to consider it. "Then at least I'll know the truth, and maybe I can make better decisions about how to help my family in the future." The night before the reunion, Eleanor practiced her story with Zoe. She would claim that her business had failed due to a series of bad investments and a lawsuit that had wiped out most of her assets. She was now living in a small apartment and working part-time to make ends meet. "Remember," Zoe coached her, "you're not bitter about it. You're embarrassed but trying to stay positive, and you're hoping the family will still accept you even though you can't help them financially anymore." Eleanor nodded, but inside she was nervous in a way she hadn't been since her early business days. "Zoe, what if I can't pull this off? What if they see through the act?" "Grandma, you built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. You can handle one family reunion." But as Eleanor looked at herself in the mirror that night, wearing her thrift store dress and practicing her humble demeanor, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. What if this plan revealed truths she wasn't prepared to handle? What she didn't know was that this reunion would force her to confront not just her family's motivations, but her own complicated relationship with money, love, and self-worth. The Washington family reunion was held at Riverside Park's community center, the same venue they had used for 15 years. Eleanor had always paid for the location, the catering, and most of the activities. This year she had quietly arranged for her assistant to handle the payments while she attended as a supposedly broke family member. Eleanor parked Maria's Honda Civic between her nephew's new Audi and her daughter-in-law's Mercedes. The contrast was immediately obvious, and she felt a flutter of anxiety as she walked toward the building carrying a store-bought potato salad instead of her usual elaborate catered contribution. Zoe met her at the entrance, having arrived earlier with her parents. "Are you ready for this, Grandma?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Eleanor replied, straightening her modest dress and checking her appearance one last time. The first person to greet her was her eldest son, Michael, who was 45 and worked as a marketing executive. Eleanor had paid for his MBA and given him the down payment for his house. "Mom," Michael said, embracing her, "you look different. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. "Just going through some changes." Michael's wife, Patricia, approached with their 2 teenage children. Patricia had always been friendly to Eleanor, but there was often a calculating quality to her warmth. "Eleanor, so good to see you," Patricia said, though her eyes immediately went to Eleanor's simple outfit and the store-bought food in her hands. "How quaint. Did you make this yourself?" "I bought it at the grocery store," Eleanor said quietly. "I've been trying to simplify things lately." She watched as Patricia and Michael exchanged a meaningful glance. Already the dynamics were shifting. Eleanor's daughter Sandra was next to greet her. Sandra was 42, recently divorced, and had been receiving monthly financial support from Eleanor to help with her children's expenses. "Mom, you look tired," Sandra said with genuine concern. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm managing," Eleanor replied. "How are Tommy and Lisa?" "They're good. Actually, Mom, I was hoping to talk to you later about Tommy's college applications. Some of the schools he's interested in are quite expensive." Eleanor felt her heart sink slightly. Even Sandra's greeting quickly turned to money matters. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor noticed a clear pattern emerging. Family members who usually sought her out for extended conversations were politely cordial, but didn't linger. Cousins who normally updated her on their business ventures and financial needs seemed to have little to say. Her nephew James, who had received a $50,000 loan from her just 6 months earlier to start a restaurant, barely acknowledged her presence. When she approached him to ask about the business, his response was brief and uncomfortable. "Oh, the restaurant's doing well, Aunt Eleanor. Thanks for asking," he said, already looking around for someone else to talk to. Eleanor felt a growing knot in her stomach. The family she had supported for years was treating her like an obligation rather than a beloved matriarch. But it was her grand-nephew Marcus, James's 19-year-old son, who delivered the most painful blow. Eleanor overheard him talking to his girlfriend near the refreshment table. "Yeah, that's my great-aunt. She used to be loaded, but I heard she lost everything in some bad business deals. Kind of sad, really. She was always good for helping out with tuition and stuff." The casual dismissal in his voice cut deeper than Eleanor had expected. Marcus had no idea she was listening, which made his words even more revealing. Zoe appeared at Eleanor's side, having witnessed the conversation as well. "Grandma, are you okay?" "I'm fine," Eleanor whispered, though she clearly wasn't, just learning some valuable lessons. As the family gathered for the traditional group photo, Eleanor found herself positioned on the edge of the group rather than in her usual central spot. The photographer, a family friend who had known Eleanor for years, looked confused by the arrangement, but said nothing. During the photo session, Eleanor's sister-in-law Carol made a comment that was meant to be helpful, but felt condescending. "Eleanor, dear, that's a lovely dress. It's so nice to see you embracing a more practical style." The subtext was clear. Now that Eleanor was broke, her simpler appearance was more appropriate. By late afternoon, Eleanor was emotionally exhausted. The family she had loved and supported was revealing sides of themselves she had never seen. But the worst was yet to come. As evening approached, the family gathered for the traditional sharing circle, where everyone updated the group on their lives, achievements, and challenges. In previous years, this had been Eleanor's opportunity to announce new business successes and offer help to family members facing difficulties. This year, she dreaded her turn to speak. When it came time for Eleanor to share, she stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 53 pairs of eyes on her. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, and a few seemed almost relieved that she was no longer the wealthy matriarch who might judge their requests for help. "This year has been challenging for me," Eleanor began, her voice deliberately shaky. "I made some poor business decisions and I've lost most of my assets. I'm living in a small apartment now and working part-time to pay my bills." The reaction was immediate and telling. Some family members looked genuinely concerned, while others seemed to relax as if a burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Her son Michael was the first to respond. "Mum, I'm sorry to hear that. If you need anything, within reason, Patricia and I might be able to help a little." Within reason. The phrase stung. This from the son whose house she had helped buy, whose children's private school tuition she had paid. Sandra's response was more emotional. "Mum, why didn't you tell me sooner? I've been asking you for help with the kids' expenses, and here you've been struggling yourself." At least Sandra seemed genuinely remorseful, Eleanor thought. But it was her nephew Robert who provided the most revealing response. "Aunt Eleanor, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. You've been carrying this family financially for years. Now you can focus on yourself and let the rest of us stand on our own feet." Several family members nodded in agreement, as if Eleanor's financial ruin was somehow liberating for them. Eleanor looked around the circle at faces she had loved and supported for decades. Some showed genuine concern and offers of help. Others displayed relief, even satisfaction, and a few seemed to be calculating how this change would affect their own financial situations. It was her great-niece Ashley, a 22-year-old college student, who delivered the final blow. "I guess this means no more family vacations to Hawaii or graduation gifts, huh? That's actually kind of a relief. It always felt weird accepting so much money from you." The casual cruelty of the comment, delivered without malice but with complete thoughtlessness, was more painful than any deliberate insult could have been. Eleanor sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of what she was experiencing. Zoe immediately moved to sit beside her, taking her grandmother's hand in a gesture of support that felt like a lifeline. "Grandma," Zoe whispered, "do you want to leave?" Eleanor was tempted to say yes, to end this painful experiment and retreat to the safety of her real life. But she forced herself to stay. She needed to see this through to understand the full extent of how her family viewed her. As the sharing circle continued, Eleanor noticed something that made her both sad and angry. Family members were now discussing their problems and challenges openly, without the usual careful consideration of whether they should ask Aunt Eleanor for help. Her niece Jennifer talked about her struggles with credit card debt, her nephew David mentioned needing a new car, and her daughter Sandra discussed her concerns about affording her son's college tuition. In previous years, all of these problems would have been subtle requests for Eleanor's financial assistance. Now they were just problems, challenges these adults would have to solve themselves. Eleanor realized with painful clarity that her wealth had not only changed how her family treated her, it had changed how they functioned as individuals. They had become dependent on her financial support, and that dependency had altered the fundamental nature of their relationships. But the evening wasn't over yet, and Eleanor was about to discover that some family members harbored resentments she had never imagined. As the formal sharing circle ended and family members broke into smaller conversation groups, Eleanor found herself largely alone. Zoe had gone to help clean up, and most of the family seemed to be avoiding her, whether out of discomfort with her financial situation or relief at not having to manage their usual requests for help. Eleanor was sitting quietly when she overheard a conversation that shattered her heart completely. Her son Michael was talking to his cousins Robert and James near the kitchen area, apparently believing they were out of Eleanor's earshot. "I have to admit there's a part of me that's relieved," Michael was saying. "Mum's been controlling this family with her money for years. Every family decision, every major purchase, every career choice, we've all been asking ourselves, what will Eleanor think? And will Eleanor help pay for it?" Robert nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And the guilt trips. Remember when I wanted to start my own business instead of working for her company? She made it clear that meant no more financial support. Or when I got divorced," James added. "She kept lecturing me about responsibility and making better choices, all while writing checks to cover my legal fees. It was humiliating." Eleanor felt like she had been physically struck. These were conversations and resentments she had never known existed. Michael continued, "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for everything she's done, the house, the kids' education, all of it. But sometimes I wonder who I might have become if I hadn't spent 45 years being Eleanor Washington's son first and my own person second. At least now we can make our own decisions without worrying about disappointing the family bank," Robert said with a bitter laugh. Eleanor stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The conversation stopped immediately as the three men realized she had been listening. "Mum," Michael said, his face flushing with embarrassment and guilt. "We didn't know you were—" "I heard every word," Eleanor said quietly. Her voice was steady, but Zoe, who had just returned from the kitchen, could see that her grandmother was barely holding herself together. "Aunt Eleanor," Robert began, "we didn't mean it the way it sounded." "Yes, you did," Eleanor replied, "and maybe you're right. Maybe I have been controlling this family with my money." The entire room had gone quiet. Other family members were pretending not to listen, but everyone was clearly aware that something significant was happening. Eleanor looked around at the faces of people she had loved and supported for decades. Some looked guilty, others defiant, and a few appeared genuinely confused about why she seemed so upset. "I have something to tell all of you," Eleanor said, her voice growing stronger. "Zoe, would you please ask everyone to gather around?" Zoe nodded, though she looked concerned about what her grandmother was planning to do. As the family reluctantly assembled, Eleanor made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of revealing the truth about her financial situation, she decided to give them exactly what they claimed they wanted. "I've been listening to your conversations today," she began, "and I've learned some valuable lessons about how my money has affected this family." She paused, looking at each face in turn. You're right that I've been controlling. You're right that my financial support has created dependencies and resentments. And you're right that it's time for all of you to stand on your own feet. Michael started to protest. Mom, we were just... No, Eleanor interrupted. You were being honest, perhaps for the first time in years, and I appreciate that honesty. She took a deep breath. So I'm going to give you what you want. From this day forward, I will no longer provide financial support to any family member for any reason. No more college tuition, no more house down payments, no more business loans, no more emergency funds. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. This was not what anyone had expected. Sandra stepped forward, looking panicked. Mom, you can't be serious. You don't have the money anymore anyway. Eleanor smiled sadly. Actually, Sandra, I do have the money. I lied to you. I'm not broke. I never lost my fortune. I came here pretending to be poor to see how you would treat me when you thought I couldn't help you anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. You lied? Michael asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and anger. I tested you, Eleanor confirmed, and most of you failed. The revelation that Eleanor had been testing them sent shockwaves through the family gathering. The reactions were immediate and varied: anger, embarrassment, guilt, and in some cases, genuine hurt. Michael was the first to explode. You lied to us. You put on this whole performance to what? Humiliate us. I put on this performance, Eleanor replied calmly, to see who in this family loves me for who I am versus who loves me for what I can provide. Patricia, Michael's wife, stepped forward with obvious anger. That's manipulative, Eleanor. You tricked us into saying things we wouldn't have said if we knew you were listening. You mean you tricked yourselves into revealing your true feelings, Eleanor countered. I didn't make you say those things. I simply gave you the opportunity to be honest. Sandra was crying now. Mum, I don't understand. Why would you do this to us? Eleanor's heart broke a little seeing her daughter's tears, but she forced herself to continue. Sandra, because I needed to know if anyone in this family would love me if I lost everything. I needed to know if my relationships with all of you were based on genuine affection or financial dependency. Her nephew Robert, who'd been particularly vocal about feeling controlled by Eleanor's money, stepped forward defiantly. And what did you learn? That we're all terrible people who only care about your money? What I learned, Eleanor said carefully, is more complicated than that. She looked around the room, her eyes stopping on certain family members. Some of you showed genuine concern when you thought I was struggling. Sandra, you immediately felt guilty about asking for help when you thought I was broke. That tells me you do care about my well-being. Sandra nodded through her tears, hope flickering in her eyes. Eleanor continued, My great-nephew Tommy came over and sat with me when he thought I looked lonely, even though he gained nothing from it. My niece Jennifer offered to share her dinner with me because she was worried I couldn't afford to eat well. Several family members looked around, beginning to realize that Eleanor had been carefully observing all their interactions. But, Eleanor's voice grew firmer, I also learned that some of you have built up years of resentment about my generosity. You felt controlled and diminished by my help, and you were actually relieved when you thought I could no longer provide it. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we never meant... Yes, you did mean it, Eleanor interrupted. And that's what makes this so painful. You meant every word you said about feeling controlled and wanting to make your own decisions without my influence. She paused, gathering her strength for what she needed to say next. So I'm going to give you exactly what you want. Complete financial independence from me. The family erupted in protests and questions, but Eleanor raised her hand for silence. Let me finish. I'm not cutting you off out of anger or revenge. I'm doing it because you've shown me that my financial support has damaged our relationships rather than strengthened them. Zoe, who had been quietly observing everything, finally spoke up. Grandma, can I say something? Eleanor nodded, grateful for her granddaughter's steady presence. I think some of you are missing the point, Zoe said, addressing the family with a maturity that surprised many of them. Grandma didn't test you to be mean or manipulative. She tested you because she's been questioning whether anyone loves her for herself. The room grew quiet as Zoe continued. Do you know how lonely it must be to wonder if your own family only calls when they need money? To question whether anyone would visit you or care about you if you lost everything? Several family members looked ashamed, beginning to understand Eleanor's perspective. My grandma has spent 40 years building wealth so she could help the people she loves, Zoe went on. But somewhere along the way, that help became an expectation instead of a gift, and some of you started resenting the very generosity that made your lives easier. Eleanor felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to her granddaughter defend her with such wisdom and compassion. James, Eleanor's nephew, who had received the restaurant loan, finally spoke up. Aunt Eleanor, I owe you an apology. When I thought you were broke, I avoided you because I felt guilty about the money you lent me, and I was embarrassed that I might not be able to pay you back. Why embarrassed? Eleanor asked gently. Because I've been struggling with the restaurant, and I was afraid you'd be disappointed in me. It felt easier to avoid you than to admit I might fail. Eleanor nodded slowly, beginning to understand how her wealth had created barriers rather than bridges in some relationships. Her great-niece Ashley, the college student who had made the thoughtless comment about family vacations, stepped forward nervously. Aunt Eleanor, I said something really stupid earlier. I didn't mean that your generosity was a burden. I meant that sometimes I felt guilty accepting so much help when other families couldn't afford those things. Eleanor studied Ashley's face, seeing genuine remorse. Ashley, why didn't you ever tell me you felt guilty about the help I provided? Because I thought you'd be hurt or offended, and because honestly I liked the vacations and the gifts. I just felt bad about liking them. The conversation was revealing layers of complex emotions that had been building for years. Eleanor was beginning to realize that her test had uncovered not just greed and manipulation, but also guilt, shame, and genuine love that had become tangled up with financial obligations. But the biggest revelation was still to come. As the family continued to process Eleanor's revelation and its implications, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Maria, Eleanor's housekeeper, appeared in the doorway of the community center. Mrs. Washington, Maria said quietly, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something I need to tell everyone. Eleanor looked surprised. Maria, what are you doing here? I've been watching from outside for the past hour, Maria admitted. I was worried about you and I could see through the windows that something difficult was happening. She took a deep breath and stepped into the room. But I can't let you do this to your family without them knowing the whole truth. Eleanor felt a flutter of panic. Maria, what are you talking about? Maria looked at the assembled family members, then back at Eleanor. She's not telling you everything about why she tested you. The room fell silent again, everyone staring at Maria with confusion. 3 months ago, Maria continued, Mrs. Washington was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Eleanor closed her eyes, her worst fear being exposed. Maria, please. But Maria continued. The doctor said she has maybe 5 to 10 years before the disease progresses significantly. She's been spending sleepless nights worrying about what will happen to her family when she's gone, and whether she's prepared you to take care of yourselves. The impact of this revelation was immediate and devastating. Sandra gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Michael went pale, sinking into a nearby chair. Several family members began crying. Mom, Sandra whispered, why didn't you tell us? Eleanor opened her eyes, looking around at faces filled with shock, love, and guilt. Because I was afraid you'd start treating me differently. I was afraid you'd start seeing me as sick instead of strong. Zoe moved to her grandmother's side, taking her hand. Grandma, I think they deserve to know. Eleanor nodded slowly. Maybe they did. But I also needed to know that you could all take care of yourselves and each other when I'm no longer able to help. Michael stood up, his earlier anger completely gone. Mum, we would have understood. If you had told us about your diagnosis, we could have talked about the future together. Could we have? Eleanor asked. Or would you have started making decisions based on pity instead of love? Would you have started agreeing with me about everything because you felt sorry for me? She looked around the room. I needed to know who in this family is strong enough to lead when I can't. I needed to know who would take care of each other and who would fall apart without my financial support. Robert, who had been so critical of Eleanor's financial control earlier, spoke up with shame in his voice. Aunt Eleanor, if you had known, would your feelings about my financial support have been different? Eleanor asked. Would you have been less resentful? Less eager for independence? The question hung in the air. Several family members realized that their honest reactions might have been the same, regardless of Eleanor's health situation. The truth is, Eleanor continued, I tested you because I need to make some difficult decisions about my estate and my family's future. I need to know who I can trust to use inherited wealth responsibly, and who might be better served by learning to be self-sufficient. Sandra was crying harder now. Mum, we've wasted so much time. If you're sick, we should be spending time together, not arguing about money. We're not wasting time, Eleanor said gently. We're having the honest conversations we should have been having for years. She looked at each family member in turn. Maria is right that I should have told you about my diagnosis, but I'm not wrong that we needed to address how money has affected our relationships. Zoe squeezed her grandmother's hand. What happens now, Grandma? Eleanor took a deep breath. Now we figure out how to move forward as a family that truly knows and loves each other, instead of a family held together by financial obligations. She paused, looking around the room at faces filled with love, guilt, shame, and hope. And we figure out how to use the time we have left together to build better relationships. Michael stepped forward, his eyes filled with tears. Mum, I love you. Not because of your money, but because you're my mother. And I'm sorry it took this situation for me to say that clearly. One by one, other family members began expressing similar sentiments, but Eleanor knew that words were easier than actions, and the real test of their relationships would come in the months and years ahead. 6 months later, the Washington family gathered again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. They met at Eleanor's home for a smaller, more intimate gathering to discuss the changes that had occurred since the reunion. Eleanor sat in her living room, surrounded by family members who now knew both her financial status and her health diagnosis. The relationships had indeed changed, but not in the ways anyone had expected. Michael spoke first. Mom, I want to update you on how Patricia and I have been doing since we decided to become financially independent. Eleanor nodded, encouraging him to continue. It's been harder than we expected, Michael admitted. We had to downsize the house and the kids had to switch to public schools. But we've also discovered that we're stronger than we thought we were. Patricia added, the kids were initially upset about the changes, but they've adapted well. And honestly, Michael and I feel more like partners now that we're making decisions together, instead of always wondering whether we should ask you for help. Eleanor smiled. How do you feel about that? Proud, Michael said without hesitation. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly providing for my family. Sandra had a different story to share. Mum, I've been thinking a lot about what you said about financial dependency. I realized that I was using your support as an excuse not to pursue better career opportunities. What do you mean? Eleanor asked. I've been working part-time and relying on your monthly checks to make up the difference. But when you said you were cutting off financial support, I was forced to look for a full-time position with benefits. Sandra smiled. I got a promotion at work, and my salary is now enough to support the kids without help. I feel more confident and capable than I have in years. Robert had perhaps the most surprising update. Aunt Eleanor, I want to thank you for that test, even though it was painful at the time. Why? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Because it forced me to examine my own relationship with money and success. I realized that I had been blaming you for my own insecurities about accepting help. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The restaurant loan you gave me wasn't controlling or manipulative. It was generous. But I was so afraid of disappointing you that I couldn't enjoy the success I was building. And now? Eleanor prompted. Now I've learned to separate my self-worth from my financial performance. The restaurant is doing well, and I'm proud of what I've built. And I'm grateful for the help you gave me to get started. Eleanor was pleased to hear these updates, but she was also watching carefully for signs that family members were simply telling her what they thought she wanted to hear. Zoe, now 15 and even more mature than before, provided the most honest assessment. "Grandma, I think what you did was necessary, but I also think some people are still hurt by how you did it." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Well, Cousin Ashley has been really struggling with college expenses since you stopped providing tuition help. She's working 2 jobs and her grades are suffering." Eleanor frowned. Ashley had been one of the family members who seemed most relieved by Eleanor's supposed financial ruin. "Is she asking for help?" Eleanor inquired. "No," Zoe replied. "She's too proud now. But I think she learned the wrong lesson from what happened at the reunion." "What lesson did she learn?" "That asking for help is bad, and that accepting family support makes you weak." Eleanor realized that her test had indeed revealed important truths, but it had also created some unintended consequences. James, Robert's father, spoke up. "Aunt Eleanor, I think Zoe is right. Some of us learned good lessons about self-reliance, but others learned to be ashamed of needing help." Eleanor considered this carefully. "What do you think I should do?" "I think," James said slowly, "that you should consider offering help differently, not as automatic support, but as opportunities for people to succeed." "Can you explain what you mean?" Sandra jumped in. "Mom, instead of just writing checks, what if you created opportunities, like job training programs, or business mentorships, or educational scholarships that require people to meet certain goals?" Eleanor's eyes lit up. "You mean help that empowers people instead of creating dependency?" "Exactly," Michael added, "and help that allows people to maintain their dignity while still benefiting from your generosity." Eleanor looked around the room at her family, people she loved deeply but had been struggling to connect with authentically. "I think you're all absolutely right." She paused, then made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I've been working with my lawyers to restructure my estate planning. Instead of leaving large inheritances to family members, I'm creating a family foundation that will provide educational opportunities, business development loans, and emergency assistance." "What does that mean for us?" Robert asked. "It means that you'll always have access to help when you truly need it, but you'll have to demonstrate how you plan to use that help to improve your situation or help others." Eleanor smiled at the faces around her. "For example, Ashley could apply for a college scholarship that would cover her tuition if she maintains good grades and commits to volunteering in the community. James could apply for a business expansion loan that would be forgiven if his restaurant hires and trains unemployed community members." Zoe beamed with pride. "Grandma, that's brilliant. You're still helping people, but you're making sure the help creates more good in the world." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "So instead of just giving us money, you're giving us ways to earn support while also helping others." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "And there's something else. I want each of you to serve on the foundation board. I want your voices involved in deciding how to help other families facing challenges." Sandra looked surprised. "You want us to help decide how to give away your money?" "Our money," Eleanor corrected. "This foundation will belong to all of us, and serving on the board will teach you about responsible philanthropy while also giving you experience in making important financial decisions together." The room fell silent as family members processed this unexpected development. Patricia was the first to speak. "Eleanor, this is actually perfect. It allows you to continue being generous while also teaching us to be generous to others. And it means we're working together instead of just receiving from you," Robert added. Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. "There's one more thing I want to tell you all." She looked at Zoe, who nodded encouragingly. "My Alzheimer's diagnosis was real, but the doctors were more optimistic than Maria made it sound. With medication and lifestyle changes, I could have many more good years ahead of me." Relief flooded the faces around her. "But," Eleanor continued, "the diagnosis did make me realize that I've been so focused on building wealth to leave to you that I forgot to build relationships to enjoy with you." She stood up slowly, looking at each person in the room. "So here's what I propose. We spend the next years working together on the foundation, learning about each other as people rather than as financial beneficiaries, and creating a legacy that's about more than just money." Michael stood up and hugged his mother tightly. "Mom, I love you, and I'm sorry it took a crisis for us to have these honest conversations." One by one, other family members joined the embrace, creating a circle that felt different from any family gathering they'd had before. Later that evening, as the family was preparing to leave, Sandra approached Eleanor privately. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you regret testing us the way you did?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused, but I don't regret learning the truth about our relationships." "Do you regret how you reacted?" Sandra smiled sadly. "I regret that it took thinking you were broke for me to realize how much I actually depend on you emotionally, not just financially. When I thought you were struggling, all I wanted to do was take care of you. And now I want to build a relationship where we take care of each other." As the family left that evening, Eleanor sat with Zoe in the quiet living room. "Grandma, how do you feel about everything that's happened?" Eleanor smiled at her wise granddaughter. "I feel like we've finally started becoming a real family instead of a business relationship. Do you think everyone learned the right lessons?" "I think everyone learned something important, even if it wasn't always the lesson I intended to teach." Zoe curled up next to her grandmother on the couch. "What's the most important thing you learned?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "I learned that love and money don't have to be enemies, but money should never be a substitute for genuine relationship." "And what's the most important thing the family learned?" "That being supported doesn't have to mean being controlled, and being independent doesn't have to mean being alone." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The test at the family reunion had been painful, but necessary. It had revealed uncomfortable truths about how money had affected their relationships, but it had also created opportunities for healing and growth. 6 months later, the Washington Family Foundation held its first grant-making meeting. Ashley received her college scholarship and began tutoring younger students. James expanded his restaurant and hired 3 unemployed community members. Sandra used a professional development grant to obtain additional certifications that led to another promotion. But more importantly, the family had learned to see each other as whole people rather than financial arrangements. They had difficult conversations about money, love, dependency, and independence. They learned to ask for help when they needed it and to offer help in ways that preserved dignity. Eleanor's Alzheimer's diagnosis remained stable, and she was able to enjoy watching her family grow into more authentic relationships with each other and with her. The second annual Washington Family Reunion was held at the same community center, but everything about it was different. This time the event was organized collectively by family members rather than funded entirely by Eleanor. Everyone contributed something: food, decorations, activities, or time. Eleanor arrived in her regular car, wearing clothes that reflected her true financial status, but the family's reaction to her was based on who she was rather than what she could provide. During the sharing circle, family members talked about their achievements, challenges, and dreams, but this time the conversations were honest and supportive rather than calculated requests for financial assistance. Michael shared that his family was thriving in their smaller home and that his children were excelling in public school. "We've learned that happiness isn't about how much you have, but about appreciating what you have." Sandra announced that she had been promoted to department manager and was considering going back to school for her master's degree, using her own savings and a small education loan from the family foundation. Robert reported that his restaurant had won a local business award and that the employees he had hired through the foundation program were now training other new hires. Ashley spoke about her college experience and her work tutoring younger students. "I've learned that receiving help gracefully and giving help generously are both important life skills." When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she stood up and looked around at faces filled with genuine love and respect. "Last year I tested this family because I was afraid you only loved me for my money. This year I know that's not true." She paused, her voice filled with emotion. "You've shown me that love and generosity can coexist with independence and dignity. You've taught me that helping others is most meaningful when it empowers them to help themselves and others." Zoe, now 16 and preparing for her own college applications, spoke last. "I think our family learned that being wealthy isn't about how much money you have. It's about how rich your relationships are and how much good you can do in the world." As the reunion concluded, Eleanor realized that her test had ultimately revealed not just her family's character, but her own growth as well. She had learned to be generous in ways that strengthened rather than weakened the people she loved. The Washington family had become truly wealthy, not just in financial terms, but in the ways that mattered most. What did you think of Eleanor's brave decision to test her family's love? Her journey shows us that sometimes the most difficult questions lead to the most important answers. How we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer reveals who we truly are inside. Leave your thoughts in the comments and rate this story from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to hear more incredible stories about ordinary people making extraordinary discoveries about love, family, and what really matters in life. Which moment in Eleanor's story touched your heart the most? Let us know and check out more inspiring stories right here on the screen.